Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this video lesson on Key Concepts of European History, Part 2. This is Period 3. This is Part 2 of Period 3, and this is 1815 to 1914. I am here with my lovely man, Cat Henry, and he's going to help me tell you all about the key concepts of European history of this period. So, we already talked about the Industrial Revolution, changes in everyday life, and the problems of industrialization. We started the maintenance of international stability in an age of nationalism and revolutions, and we're going to complete that now. We're also going to discuss the different motives and methods that led to an intensification of European power, and thus led to tensions among the great powers. This is going to help us understand the build-up to World War I. I think Henry wants to go do something else now. All right, Mancat, go ahead. All right, so we're going to start with a discussion of the key concept 3.4. European states struggled to maintain international stability in an age of nationalism and revolutions. So the Concert of Europe, or the Congress system as it's sometimes known as, sought to maintain the status quo through collective action and adherence to conservatism. So the key goal here was to maintain the balance of power and maintain the status quo. And we did this through conservatism. So Metternich, who's like the king of all things conservative, was the architect of the Concert of Europe. Okay, it's very important. Architect of the Concert of Europe. If you don't know what the Concert of Europe is, you really need to look that up and have a working definition in your mind. Memorize it. He used it to suppress nationalist and liberal revolutions because those nationalist and liberal revolutions would lead directly to instability. And the Concert of Europe was designed to prevent said instability. Conservatives reestablished control in many European states and attempted to suppress movements for change. And in some areas, they strengthened adherence to religious authorities because religion has always been a very useful means of control by authoritative rulers. In the first half of the 19th century, revolutionaries attempted to destroy this status quo. And the revolutions of 1848 directly challenged the conservative order and led to the breakdown of the Concert of Europe. So the revolutions of 1848 are very, very key. Initially, it looked like they were going to be very successful, and then they went, so you need to understand how and why that happens. Very important. So the breakdown of the Concert of Europe opened the door for movements of national unification, which I mentioned very briefly in the last video lesson, in both Italy and Germany, in addition to liberal reforms elsewhere in Europe. So the Crimean War, important war, you should know it, demonstrated the weakness of the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire, as we know, of course, would end during World War I, but the Crimean War was a death blow to the Ottoman Empire. And this contributed to the breakdown of the Concert of Europe, thereby creating the conditions in which Italy and Germany could be united after centuries of fragmentation. Also, a new breed of conservative leaders, Napoleon III, Napoleon's grandson, Cavour, and Bismarck, co-opted the agenda of nationalists for the purposes of creating or strengthening the state. Okay, so you need to understand where these leaders come from, all right, which countries they were in charge of. So the breakdown of the Concert of Europe, this is the previous standard, but there's additional items we need to talk about. So, the creation of a dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary, which recognized the political power of the largest ethnic minority, was an attempt to stabilize the state by reconfiguring national unity. So, the dual monarchy of Austria-Hungary is going to be important. As you should know, it's going to be particularly key for World War I. And in Russia, autocratic leaders pushed through a program of reform and modernization, which gave rise to revolutionary movements and eventually the Revolution of 1905. To be followed by the Revolution of 1917. So, this unification of Italy and Germany transformed the European balance of power and led to efforts to construct a new diplomatic order. Because remember, the Concert of Europe was trying to maintain the status quo, but eventually that status quo was broken down, which led directly to the unification of Italy and Germany. Now, in the aftermath of this breakdown of the Concert of Europe, Europe needed to construct a new diplomatic order. Cavour's realpolitik strategies, that's a key term, realpolitik. You should have a working definition of what that word means. Combined with the popular Garibaldi's military campaigns, led to the unification of Italy. Bismarck employed diplomacy, industrialized warfare and weaponry, and the manipulation of democratic mechanisms to unify Germany. Now, after 1871, Bismarck was trying to really maintain the balance of power. He was all about maintaining this balance through a complex system of alliances that was directly directly directed. That's good, Miss Blank. That's good. Was directed at isolating France. Okay. But his dismissal in 1890 eventually led to a system of mutually antagonistic alliances and heightened international tensions. If you want to blame one individual for World War I, you know, aside from the people who assassinated the Archduke, you can blame Otto von Bismarck. Nationalist tensions in the Balkans drew the great powers into a series of crises that led up to the opening of the First World War. So, let's move on to key concept 3.5. A variety of motives and methods led to the intensification of European global control and increased tensions among the great powers. European nations were driven by economic, political, and cultural motivations in their new imperial ventures in Asia and Africa. So, we're looking at imperialism now. Very, very important ism. Economic, political, cultural motivations. European national rivalries and strategic concerns fostered imperial expansion and competition for colonies. So now we're sort of bouncing back into the age of exploration in terms of competition and issues with strategy and, of course, an increase in colonization. The search for raw materials and markets for manufactured goods, as well as strategic nationalistic considerations, drove Europeans to colonize Africa and Asia, even as European colonies in the Americas broke free politically, if not economically. So as the New World colonies were breaking away from their European controllers, now Europeans were seeking out other colonies to strong arm, and they looked to Asia and Africa. Europeans also justified imperialism through an ideology of cultural and racial superiority, social Darwinism. Social Darwinism. When you're thinking of a European justification of imperialism, you really want to think about social Darwinism and this other idea called white man's burden. So, industrial technological developments, i.e. the Second Industrial Revolution, facilitated European control of global empires. So the development of advanced weaponry invariably ensured the military superiority of Europeans over colonized areas. This made it very easy to bring under their umbrella of control the native peoples and the areas that Europeans were colonizing. Communication and transportation technologies allowed for the creation of European empires. Without these new communication and transportation innovations, this modern era of imperialism and colonialism would have been impossible. And advances in medicine supported European control of Africa and Asia by preserving European lives. So back in the day, the diseases that used to kill off the European explorers in the age of exploration, they were not killing off European explorers now, or European colonizers now, or at least not in the numbers they used to. So this made the colonization of Africa and Asia possible. Imperial endeavors significantly affected society, diplomacy, and culture in Europe, and created a resistance to foreign control abroad. So imperialism created diplomatic tensions among European states that strained alliance systems. This is going to be, remember, the causes of the First World War, Maine. Imperialism is the I in Maine. Imperial encounters with non-European peoples influenced the styles and subject matter of artists and writers, which provoked debate over the acquisition of colonies. So you have to understand that despite the fact that European leaders were marching full steam ahead at colonization, there were several dissenters within each of these European countries that believed that imperialism was wrong, that it was inherently immoral and should be stopped. And a lot of this debate took place through the art of the period. As non-Europeans became educated in Western values, they challenged European imperialism through nationalist movements and or by modernizing their own economies and societies. So Europeans dealt with a much greater, a lot more dissent and upheaval in their colonial empires than they used to endure during the age of exploration. So this made colonization more challenging in this period than it was in previous eras. Now let's move on to key concept 3.6. European ideas and culture expressed a tension between objectivity and scientific realism on one hand, and subjectivity and individual expression on the other. Enter art movements like Romanticism and the development of modernism and so forth. So Romanticism directly broke with neoclassical, which is more Enlightenment, forms of artistic representation and with rationalism. And they placed a much greater emphasis on intuition and emotion and this overarching need to directly connect with nature and the larger universe. So Romantic artists and composers broke from classical artistic forms to emphasize emotion, nature, individuality, intuition, the supernatural, and natural histories within their works. Romantic writers expressed similar themes while responding to the Industrial Revolution and to various political revolutions. So you can see this interesting dichotomy, this divide between European society that was being played out in artistic endeavors. Following the revolutions of 1848, Europe turned toward a realist and a materialist world view. So positivism, or the philosophy that science alone provides knowledge, emphasized the rational and scientific analysis of nature and human affairs. Romanticism was a direct counterpunch to that. All right. Charles Darwin provided a rational and material account of biological change and the development of human beings as a species, and inadvertently justification for rational racialist theories known as social Darwinism. Okay, so basically, if you think about Darwinism, it's survival of the fittest. So the species that is the most fit will end up surviving. The least fit will die out. European imperialists applied this idea, this dogma, to imperialism. So if the native peoples are meant to survive, they would. But since the Europeans conquered them rather effortlessly, this lended credibility to their idea that European culture was in fact superior, was the fittest culture. Now, Marx's scientific socialism provided a systematic critique of capitalism and a deterministic analysis of society and historical evolution. All right, so now we have an additional social critique coming from Karl Marx. Realist and materialist themes and attitudes influenced art and literature as painters and writers depicted the lives of ordinary people and drew attention to social problems. So no longer were only the elites patronizing the arts and thus being reflected within those arts. Now you're looking at a particular attention to ordinary, everyday, average Joe people. That's what artists are latching onto. And as historians, we appreciate that because it gives us a nice insight into what life was like for these folks. So a new relativism in values, plus the loss of confidence in the objectivity of knowledge, led to modernism in both intellectual and cultural life. Modernism is very, very key. You need to pay attention to that. So philosophy largely moved from rational interpretations of nature and human society to an emphasis on irrationality and impulse, a view that contributed to the belief that conflict and struggle led to progress. So the idea you can't make an omelet without breaking some eggs. And revolutionaries were all about breaking the whole damn dozen. They broke the whole thing so that they could remake society in the way they wanted it to be. Freudian psychology, interesting. And now, actually, if you read a lot of psychology, like modern psychology, what's happening now, a lot of Freud stuff is like people are like, no. These conventional wisdom, these ideas that Freud had that still stick in our minds, a lot of modern day psychologists have debunked, ironically enough. But Freudian psychology provided a new account of human nature that emphasized the role of the irrational and the struggle between the conscious and the subconscious. This is a very important development within the discipline of psychology. Let's continue. Developments in the natural sciences, such as quantum mechanics. Don't ask me to explain, how quantum mechanics works. I'm a social studies. That's a physics thing. And Einstein's theory of relativity undermined the primacy of Newtonian physics as an objective description of nature. Newton reigned supreme all the way up through the Enlightenment and up until this point where Einstein started to take precedence. Modern art, there were several movements within, because if you have the umbrella, picture an umbrella, and the umbrella is modern art, and then underneath the umbrella, you're going to have Impressionism, Post-Impressionism, Cubism, you have some Surrealism, you're going to get into lots of different isms within the art world at this point, which feeds into this idea of the individual that is developing during this time. These modern art forms move beyond the representational to the subjective, the abstract, and expressive, and often provoked audiences that believe that art should reflect shared and idealized values, such as beauty and patriotism. So these artistic movements were a direct counterpunch to this idea of idealizing one's nation and one's cultural values. It was very subjective, it was very individualistic. That is the end of period 3, ladies and gentlemen. Stay tuned for period 4, and I hope you learned what you needed to, and I will see you next time.